All right, welcome everyone to the CrySP speaker series on privacy. Our speaker today is Aiman Erbad. Aiman got his PhD in 2012 from UBC and is now an assistant professor at Qatar University. And he'll be talking to us about the interplay between Tor and Bitcoin. So let's welcome him.
Thank you, Ian. So I'm really excited to see a large group here. Probably the number of researchers here is probably double the security researcher in Qatar. So that's actually exciting to be around a lot of security people. So I just want to start by giving credit to our student in Qatar University, Hussam. He did most of the work that I will be talking about today. This work is a collaboration between us and QCRI, Qatar Computing Research Institute. If you have any question about Qatar University, Qatar, the region, the blockade, anything you have in mind, we can take it at the end. But anonymity and privacy are very critical, and I'm sure that you guys are working on this area. But just from our perspective in Qatar, we have Al Jazeera, huge channel, huge news agency, and it has so many people in the ground in very hostile environments. So for them, anonymity and all of the things that you guys work on and some of the things that we scratch today is really for them life and death. And for a lot of activists, actually, it means a lot to them. So this is why we are very interested in Qatar University and Qatar in general to know how can we make this a little bit of a better place for those anonymity seekers. And a lot of these people who are using the Tor and now when they go online and have some financial transaction, they all also do Bitcoin. So this is the play between Tor hidden services, and Bitcoin. And what does it mean when I start using Bitcoin as a payment method, even though I'm a person who doesn't want to be known or I want to be anonymous? So we scratched the surface in this study, trying to see some of the things that what it means if you are one of those people who want to use these things and you think in a good way that it will help you be more anonymous. Knowing that Bitcoin is with the pseudo-anonymous identifiers is not 100% anonymous, but if you follow good practice, you might be close. So Bitcoin is the most popular cryptocurrency. A lot of people now think maybe other cryptocurrencies are coming, but until now it's a reality. In the dark web, we have a lot of studies and a lot of people who studied what is used. It's also Bitcoin. But when it's used in that context with hidden services, a big question is, are we still anonymous? Are our users still not linked to us? Because linking them to us might cause them to be in big trouble. But from the Satoshi paper, it was well known that you are susceptible to be linked to your transaction. And the blockchain is permanent. So whatever transaction you make 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it's going to be there. So any linking can de-anonymize you, and it will be retroactively. So if you are applying for a job now, or maybe 5 years from now, and companies have started to use all the tools to get the history of their employees, and you have something that you don't want them to see about you, whether it's activism, whether using pirated video, it's a big problem, even for a simple person who want to keep his history intact while using online services. So, to make it just simple and so we can visualize it before we start in the technical stuff. If you have a person, Alice, and she has an online identity, Facebook, Twitter, BitcoinTalk, some online identity. And through that identity, accepted maybe some payment, exposed the Bitcoin address, her Bitcoin address in some online fashion, anywhere. And so that gives us a link between a Bitcoin address, which is not following standard good practice. A lot of people keep the same address. They don't create one address per transaction as they should. So they have that address, and it becomes now linked to your online identity. This same person now goes, tries to purchase, do some transactions, do a donation to her favorite blog, do a WikiLeaks donation, whatever, something with a hidden service. And now that connection between this person who you already know, their virtual ID is now established with some hidden service somewhere. And if that hidden service also, and this was a practice before where they actually publish on the landing page, they will publish their Bitcoin address. Or if you can get their Bitcoin address in a smart way, doing some transaction with them, now you are sort of linked to this hidden service. What this means that if you are in a country where you are not supposed to do any transaction with this entity, whether it's video, pirated video, whether it's illicit material, whatever, but you are now going to be linked to this identity. And let's talk about the other side. Let's talk about our model of the attack. So our model of the attack is a passive, limited attacker, someone who has access to online information, public information usually. Someone who doesn't control the network, someone who has no big database like Google or Amazon or any of the... It's just a person with a computer who can go online and get information that's publicly available. You, in any online forum, you exposed your Bitcoin, and the Bitcoin hidden service exposing its Bitcoin address. And we do an analysis after we have these two publicly available pieces of information. We do some analysis to do the linking between those two addresses. And Trudy, if we think about Trudy now as the attacker, they crawl the Bitcoin address for you from one of those online social networks or forums, and then it calls the hidden service from the landing page. This practice changed. Now it's a bit harder to get the address. And you need maybe, we are still going with just some addresses that we picked up from landing pages, but you can be more sophisticated attacker. But Trudy gets this trawl data and looks at the ledger. Look when you see one of the users you have, users that have exposed their identity as an input in a transaction, and you see that hidden service, which you already know the Bitcoin address to, as an output in the transaction, in the Bitcoin transaction. And if you see this, then this establishes the connection between the user, his virtual identity, which a lot of the times can have a lot of information about his real identity or her real identity, and that hidden service. And at the end, you will have these users, and you can know which hidden services they interacted with. Silk Road, Pirate Bay, all of these activist group and a lot of things. Maybe these are the famous ones, but your favorite blog, your blog where you put information for underrepresented communities. A lot of things can be in that place, not some of the perceived bad websites. So let's talk just quickly about our approach. And this is an exploration. This study was just to explore how the Tor Bitcoin, so we are still in the beginning. I really want to get your input also on some of what we have here. But our approach was, as we said, we use things that are just there, very passive, low, limited adversary, download the landing pages. This happened, I think, around 2014. A lot of hidden services were actually exposing their addresses in their landing pages. We had around 1,500 landing page. We got around 105 addresses, but we did some cleaning. We looked at the hidden services that have no transaction removed, hidden services that have very negligible amount of money. Maybe not so negligible now, but it was 0.05, which might be around $300 today. But something, so we excluded some of these hidden services. Out of the 105, we got around 88 that we thought are good to start our investigation. In terms of the actual material for users, we went into the Decahose stream data. I think we tried to match the same dates because we wanted to study something around the same date. So I think this data is 2014 data. 5 billion tweets. We managed to get around 4,183. And these are two things, either people who are exposing it in their profile, in their in Twitter profile, or people who tweeted themselves about Bitcoin, and it's in their tweets, not in their followers. It's in their personal tweets. So we thought this might be an indicator that it's their address or an address they control. We also went to BitcoinTalk, the biggest forum, around 1 million actually users, but say 900K. We crawled all the profile, and it's a more specialized community, so most of them have addresses, and a lot of them expose their addresses there for different reasons. And here we didn't look at their post. We only looked at the Bitcoin address field or the signature, because this is a forum where they talk about Bitcoin all the time. So you don't want to have a link between the address and any post that they make. So only in their profile or in their signature. So we managed to get that many addresses. But this still was a small set. This is a small set, but it's also not representative in the sense that each user in Bitcoin has a lot of addresses. If you are changing your address every once in a while, and you have been there for some time, you will have multiple addresses. So what we wanted is we wanted for each user, each entity to have a wallet that has all the, let me skip this. Yeah, so we wanted to have a wallet that has all the addresses that are controlled by that user. So we did what we call closure analysis. And in that closure analysis, we used a heuristic that was proposed by, I think if you read the white paper we publish on the archive, you'll see. But it's a very standard heuristic. And the heuristic says if two addresses appear in the same transaction as input, then they are likely to be controlled by the same user. In the sense that you are now making a payment. As anybody makes payment in Bitcoin, they pick those addresses and they put them together as input, and they put the output as the receiver of that payment. So we use this heuristic to say that to build that closure or the wallet for each user. And this helped us a lot because it expanded the list of things that we can link to. Because a lot of people, they think if I change my address and if I moved on like 1 year from that address, then that address is in the past. Whatever was related to it will not come and affect me now. But if you still have a continuous history moving money between your previous addresses, there is a way that you will be caught. We downloaded the blockchain. This is to do the transaction analysis. Downloaded the whole blockchain. We used BlockSci, which is now becoming a standard tool to process blockchain data. Initially, we used BlockSci only to extract the transaction for the two addresses sets, the sets of the user and the set of hidden service. Now we also use it for the clustering because we are, it's now doable there. So we use BlockSci, we extract all the transaction related to this address, and then we look, is the user an input here, and is the hidden service and output on any transaction. If it's there, then the link is established. And for these users that we are targeting, we know who they are through the social network and all of the analysis. And then we try to see, after we did this, we tried to look more at the hidden service economy, at least for the few hidden services that we have. This is some of the initial results. I think we did one iteration that is not included here this summer, but it didn't change the data much. So if you look at this data on the left side, the linked user, this is how many users within our set of, I don't know, 41,000 users. So from the Twitter users, which are around 4,000, we managed to get 11 linked to WikiLeaks, 35 from the forum users linked to WikiLeaks, with a total of 46. So these are people who donated to WikiLeaks, probably. Then you have also some other services, like Silk Road. And around that time, Silk Road was mainly selling, it was for drugs. So it's a bit troubling for people who will be attached to it, if they care. Some people probably don't. But if they care about their reputation, about how people perceive them, it's a bit of a problem. You have 4 users from the Twitter users, and you have 18 from the forum, the BitcoinTalk. And if you look at the volume, the right side is actually more related to the hidden service, not to the link between the two. So that right side is saying that for Silk Road, it had around 1,000 transactions. The incoming was 29,000 Bitcoin, and the outgoing is around the same number. And we saw that in almost all of the sophisticated Bitcoin services, that they get the money on an address and then it's distributed. Because this address is known at that time, so they don't want it to be attached to anything. So they sort of move the money, mix it to make traceability harder to do. A lot of these are still active until 2017. If you look at the first transaction and last transaction, so most of them were active, which means that these addresses are very long-term. They stay with the services, and for a lot of people also, the address stays with them, which is something interesting. If you really want to be secure in these platforms, you have to go through addresses very quickly. Another type of, I think, sort of a detour was to look at if people are using personal wallet versus wallets that are hosted in a lot of services, exchanges, and miners. So you find that a good number of people in our data sets are actually around maybe 100 are using CrySP, Bittrex, around 60 people. And we try to quantify this because these are one of the things that confuse our algorithm, because a lot of these services, if you only depend on that heuristic I told you about, it's sort of a mixing service. So the money is mixed when you put it into these exchanges, because they do different things to move money from your account using other addresses, making it harder to trace beyond here. So when we did the analysis and we did the analysis on the data, a lot of these were actually creating huge clusters that were a bit harder to work with. So now we are investigating what other techniques and what other heuristics we can add to tackle some of these services. If you look at the money that's flowing, this is in the thousands of Bitcoins. You will see that most services have very little amount of Bitcoin. So it's almost less than 1,000 Bitcoin, up to almost 93 or 92 have less than 1,000 Bitcoin. And you have some of the high hitters, WikiLeaks, Silk Road, they are having a lot of Bitcoins. This is in terms of the money, and this is in terms of the transaction. And if you look at the data for the lifetime, and this is sort of biased by our data, it's mostly data, at least for the Twitter, it's in that area. And for the hidden services, you'll find a lot of these hidden services, they were active when we collected 1 year before. But the interesting part is a good percentage of them are active 3-4 years after we did after those transactions have been done. So if we look at the result at a more fine-grained, you will have Twitter. We managed to de-anonymize 28 users using 13 hidden services, 167 transactions. For the BitcoinTalk, it's 97 users that we managed to de-anonymize, 16 hidden services, 115 transaction. That was the link between the two. So total of unique 20 hidden services and unique 125 users were linked. So now we have de-anonymization, if you consider the virtual identity in Twitter or in the forum as their real identity. But if you really want to de-anonymize that person and know who they are, you have to go a little bit deeper and go to the information provided in their profile, try to discern whether it's the real person, whether they actually have any personal identifiable information, phone number, email, things that you can follow. For us as just a limited passive attacker, we stop there and we consider this a de-anonymization. For somebody who is more resourceful, some entities that will actually benefit, whether government or they will probably go to the second level. And the number of connections might be a bit small, but if we try to become a little bit more active attackers. If we try to do transactions with hidden services that we want to address, and if we have access to something like the Google index or the Twitter dataset, can get more addresses and more. I think this type of attack is a little bit more serious for this type of attack. Even with the simple passive attack, information online for people who really care about their privacy and anonymity, we were able to do these links. And I'll talk to you now a little bit about some case studies and why this type of attack is a bit serious, and why people should be aware that it exists, and hopefully some of the countermeasures should be used. So in the data, we had a person who had personally identifiable information. It says his country is Sweden. He's dealing with Pirate Bay. And if you follow the case of Pirate Bay, it was actually established in Sweden, and there is a court ruling that it is the person who started it, he was sentenced. So something like this can be incriminating if it was found and if it was traced back to that person, and things can be established. Another case study that we try to go a little bit deep in is the Silk Road, the people who are using it, and mainly at the time of these studies it was for drugs. 22 users were linked from our data set from different countries, mainly North America. 4 males, 6 females. You can get their age from their profiles, and some of them were active. And most of this was done in 2017 and beginning 2018. So they were active until we did that, and I think they are still. Some of them are still active. This is a big problem. It's a big problem. If you get, we had some of these cases for somebody who was young, teenager. So he was even younger by the time this happened. So his profile now says he's 17, 18. And when this happened, it was probably even before. He was an active member since 2013. His profile links to everything, his YouTube channel, his accounts. You can really know who this person was. So this goes back to that it's not really the problem of the... It's a problem of anybody who has used some of these services, who was not careful, exposed his address, and it can be big reputational damage for somebody like this. So I think I talked about some of these points. Whether you are passive or active, we took the position of just passive attacker. We were able to de-anonymize people. I think for active adversary, you will have, the more the adversary has power over the network, over data sets, it can be very troubling. There are some studies that can map your identity in Bitcoin to your IP, and this can lead to your geographical location. And if you have an active adversary, this can lead to you yourself, or at least to your home or network that you are using. There's a lot of information in the profiles that we didn't really keep or try to pursue further. But a study on its own can be done on how far you can reach, how you can identify people. Public addresses can be used. So for sure, after we have this study done, this exploration, anybody who publishes his Bitcoin address, whether it's the hidden service or the user, they put themselves and their user at a lot of trouble. It can link, and linking can be used a lot by government for sure. If they know that this profile is a profile of somebody who was linked to something that they need to know, they can really ask these BitcoinTalk Sifona request for more information, profile, email. They can do a lot of that. So active adversaries can be much more stronger in their reach. This work has led us to different things, and we are still really at the exploration phase of trying to understand different aspects. This is sort of a side study. So I think the main talk about the main study is sort of done. But this is a sort of a side exploration study. We were looking at people who are doing Ponzi scheme. We are trying to look at who they are, their ages, their geographical distribution. We are also trying to do some linking on them, trying to see what they use, what are the services they use, what are the exchanges that are involved. So this is sort of a side study, trying to use the linking and some of the interesting stuff. More interesting stuff in this work and even in the previous work is to really start to look at different behaviors that people have, like whether the people who are using Ponzi schemes, can we get features and machine learning to really detect these users and then try to run it on the big blockchain and see if different people have the same behavior, and we can, because these people are people who really are tagged. They declare that they are MMM global by themselves, while you have a lot of other people who are using Bitcoin for this, but they are not really tagging themselves in their profile saying that they are using. So similar studies, if you look at hidden service users, some of the one that we found, and try to look at their behavior using machine learning, trying to see are they usually more engaged with some type of services, what's the type of services they are using. We still don't have some data sets bigger about hidden services, but there's a lot of work with the open Bitcoin ledger and the machine learning, if somebody is interested in that direction. We really wanted to expose some of these issues because it's very important that people know that these things exist, because some of them can be rectified. So operationally, you can use best practices, try to create one address per transaction, put the right setting and configuration so you are more secure. This you can still be traced and linked, but it makes it much harder. If you use mixing services, things that mix your Bitcoins with others, this definitely puts you behind a bigger wall. At least for the simple passive attackers, it's very easy to not be attacked in that way. There's a lot of also good work that have been happening in the Bitcoin community, a lot of good research, and some of these studies that show why you really need to adopt them. It's very important. Some improvement in the protocol, also new Bitcoin currencies, Zcash, Monero, Dash. A lot of these are actually much better in keeping you anonymous when you do your transaction. Especially if you are running a hidden service trying to really be anonymous. That's the real issue. So Bitcoin as a payment method is the most famous, the most prevalent, even in the dark web. But with some of the things that we said, I think it might make you a little bit more vulnerable to be de-anonymized. It's not only for dark web, even though our study only focused on hidden service Bitcoin, but the same analysis can be done in the big ledger and try to link different people to different services they use, and try to, maybe for monetary purpose, then try to do a lot of linking. Retroactively, people can get you for a long time if you do this type of transaction and you do not delete that post or that thing that exposed you, or somebody already collected that data and you cannot delete it. So retroactively, people can be de-anonymized, which is a big problem. And this type of analysis is really useful for many stakeholders, whether it's business, law enforcement. A lot of people are doing this linking and de-anonymization for different purposes. So people who are really serious about being anonymous, especially people running hidden services, Tor, I think they really either understand what it entails to use Bitcoin and other, and make the best choices that they can. And thank you. Yeah. So the question is for the people who are actually using this address. So for the people who are like hidden services, for sure they can follow best practices. They can. We know they don't, but they can, because they are doing it for different people at different times. But for somebody doing a campaign, collecting money, or trying to collect money on an address, it's much harder to change their address. The answer is that if it's the case and they really want to use it as an address, a permanent address, they have to be very aware, because when you start using this address and then move money from this address to another address that you own, and then you start really exposing yourself, and because it's not only the address that you put in your signature or in your post, it's actually all of the cluster of addresses that you control. And if you really know that this is exposed, then you might want to isolate it from the other coins, but then you only can spend from that. It makes it very hard. Yeah. So don't use it to collect unless it's isolated in a good way. Okay, so the question is our research sort of seeing more phishing attacks that are related to, I think our scope was, it did not include this type of attacks unless that attack involved some sort of a transaction that involves some Bitcoin. So for example, if, and maybe I'll get you a little bit to ransomware. Ransomware, you have these addresses that are sort of tying your machine, encrypting your data, and until you pay them, they will keep your data encrypted and you will not access your machine. So this we can capture because people have published the addresses on forums saying these are ransomware, and different people are posting saying that they were attacked. And there is a financial monetary transaction that we can see in the ledger. So this we can capture, and we did capture some of these, but other type of attacks, it's not very easy to see. We have now started a new study, sort of also an exploration, to study people who are using, who are doing local Bitcoin, which means that they are exchanging outside the Bitcoin sort of standard transaction community. So they will talk on a forum, they will agree on the price, and this actually exposes people to more cheating and more, but we are still in the beginning of that study. We are seeing countries where it's actually not allowed to do regular Bitcoin transaction. We're seeing there is an increase in using these type of services. But maybe I did not answer your core question. Yeah.
So you looked at linking services, users to big services. Did you look at linking to see if there were payments between services or payments between users?
Oh, that's interesting. No, actually, our heuristic was mostly focused on people who are using the user as the input and the service as the output. We only got if two services are owned by the same person, then they become part of that cluster. The analysis algorithm tries to see if people are moving money back and forth between services. So two of the bitcoins that we know are owned by two different things are used as input, then the cluster becomes bigger. But financial transaction, like purchasing from another service, we did not really try to study that. But it would be interesting, actually. The only issue we have is the data set of hidden services is very small. So if you guys know anybody, because I know some people did. I even looked at some of the speakers here who did very good Sarah, I think. So but we are just a passive, just a limited attacker who just have maybe, how many, 88 addresses? Very small, very little, tiny.
Any other questions for Aiman?
Yes?
You mentioned mixing techniques that could be applied in Bitcoin. What would actually happen if people use mixing of coins and then you rerun your attack? Would it simply not work, or would it give you incorrect linkings?
It will give us... I was not disciplined and repeating it. So the question is, if you are using a mixing service, would this make our analysis wrong, or would it give us the wrong clustering?
Well, the question was essentially, would you just not get a result, or would you get a wrong result?
Oh, whether I would get a result or I will get the wrong result. So the answer is we get the wrong result. And the reason is we get... so what mixing services do is that you lose this one-to-one ownership of your bitcoins. So it becomes a pool of bitcoins. And they can make payment with other bitcoins that technically belong to other people. And they can use your bitcoin to pay for the transaction of a different person. So you become part of a pool. And when that happens, all of you within that pool or exchange belong to one big cluster, which is not the case. Our cluster is always trying to see who is that entity or a person who controls a set of addresses. But when you start this, so we had the cleaning heuristic. We tried to remove these big clusters. And when we started to remove these big clusters, the interesting fact is 99 point something was personal locks. So we actually know because the big exchanges are tagged. So we know these. So when we did our cleaning algorithm, we removed these clusters that don't make sense. Most of the addresses remaining are for people who are managing their own local wallets in their computers usually, or in a computer somewhere that they control. So yeah, so we need to find either heuristic. It makes it much harder, but I think for a stronger attacker, an attacker that has a little bit more information, I think even those cases can be linked if you can stay over time and have some algorithm to trace or have some deduplicate. I don't know. Something will work, but not for us for now. Go ahead.
So recently Ross Anderson and colleagues had an interesting paper positing that in these like kind of mixed situations where you have a bunch of people, separate people coming in as inputs to a transaction being paid to a bunch of places, if you're trying to do like taint analysis, like this was a stolen Bitcoin and where did it go? And when it gets to a mix, what do you do about the stolenness?
What do you do about?
Or colored coins or any other type of taint tracking that they do in Bitcoin. So Anderson's paper had a posited that the actual legal standard that the financial community uses, at least in the UK and in some other Commonwealth countries, is something called first in, first out, which means his position was that in the Bitcoin context, that means if you look at the transaction and the input Bitcoins are listed in this order and the output Bitcoins are listed in this order, you match them up first in, first out, and that's how the taint flows, rather than the taint getting diluted by the mix or the taint being evenly spread over all the outputs. And that gives you a completely different picture of how coins get linked in a kind of legal sense, right? So how would taking into account a linking algorithm like that kind of change the analysis when you're looking at your mixes?
Yeah, that's so you are saying that in their work they were studying the flow of Bitcoins when they go into these, for us they are black boxes, the mixing services and the bigger exchange where they actually have leverage to move your Bitcoin around. So if you are just interested, this is me just thinking, if you are just interested in the flow of money at a macro scale, then it probably doesn't matter, because that algorithm will see at a high level who is using. But if you want to de-anonymize that user who used it, it might be a little bit harder. If you want to use it for de-anonymization, is that...
No, so he's not using it for de-anonymization, so
Yeah.
it can't track.
It can't
who
keep, yeah.
paid in to who paid out.
Yeah.
But it tracks the legal liability.
The liability. So
right?
all of
So
the
if this
people in the
coin is
mix.
stolen,
Yeah.
and you want to know who is now holding this stolen coin that has to give it back.
Oh,
Right.
yeah, I know that, yeah. So legally, yeah, it's fine. But then it's a little bit hard, because even if you are using a service that most of the people who are law-abiding, and there's few of the... It's a bit hard. But is it... So the legal so that dollar or that Bitcoin that moved around, you will capture that Bitcoin even though the person who put his money there was not aware?
That's right. That's the intent.
That's interesting. So this will push people who are on the long term using services to really know what these services. So it's sort of like re-establishing banks to some extent, because what a bank is a trusted entity that over the years made good transaction and got rid of the malicious people. So it puts more responsibility on the exchanges now to do some of what banks do. And if they do that, this increases their cost, and maybe we have to make a payment. It will not. Yeah, interesting, very interesting.
A question? No? Okay, let's thank him.
Thank you. Thank you.